Well, morning folks. So I'm riding a different bike today, and you can probably guess which one it is as well. I'm riding the GS Adventure today. BMW have had a bit of a push on recently in terms of, I think this week is their sort of test ride week. They're rolling out some of the new models to us. So here I am on the 2018 GS Adventure, what's known as a triple black model. And as you know, in November I bought, after much deliberation and thought, a 1200RT. I've got a 2016 model, so 2 years behind this. So what is today? Today is essentially a comparison between the two. And I guess the heading for this video really is would I swap? So we're going to give it a go, and we'll take a look. And assuming money wasn't a problem, would I swap? And I've got to say right at the start, I've actually no intention to swap, certainly in the short term, but maybe in the medium term, if I really like what I see, then I might be tempted over to the dark side of the GS's. So I looked on YouTube. I couldn't actually find a sort of a comprehensive comparison of the two bikes. I mean, if you go on the blogs and just put RT versus GS or RT versus GSA, there are lots of discussions running there, some really good discussions. And I'll just give you the health warning right at the beginning. I'm not putting myself up as an expert motorcyclist. For the benefit of those of you who've never seen my material before, I've come back to biking after an awful long time, 37 years in fact. So I'm part way into an advanced riding course. I'm still getting to know the BM, so I'm not putting myself up as a BMW expert. So just remember that when you put the comments in, but hopefully this sparked a bit of a debate off anyway. So anyway, here I am. It's very early March in the UK. It's cold and wet and miserable outside. Got the heated grips on the bike, so I've got my hands nice and warm. And we just want to see what it can do. So I've got a route here of probably about 70 miles. So heading south from Wollaston's in Northampton down towards Bedford. Then from Bedford I'm going to pick up what's known as the B660, which is one of the classic biking roads in the UK. So we'll just see what it's like around the corners there. Again, I'm not going to be throwing it around. And then back along the dual carriageway into Northampton. So see what you think anyway. So my initial impression then, first of all, it's black. It's black all over. So this is the triple black version. I suppose I was half thinking I'll be riding the sort of the blue or the red version. So that was a sort of a slight surprise. First off, I didn't realise it actually came in this colour. The second thing then is just literally just how big this TFT display is and how absolutely pin sharp it is. So today the reflection from the sun is not going to be much of a problem, I don't think. It being cloudy, wet and miserable. But we've got quite a strong crosswind as well, by the way, so I'll be interested in the level of wind protection that I think the GSA gives in comparison with the RT. So anyway, yeah, back to the display. On the basis that I guess the majority of people who are going to buy one of these are probably for 50 years plus, it's very easy to read for us long-sighted individuals. That's one of the first things I note. I mean, really, you know, the size of the typeface on here is absolutely massive. And you might also be able to notice as well the rev counter that runs around the outside of the outside of the display. The numeral lights up. So if I'm doing 3,000 revs, you might notice, for example, that the 3 is actually slightly bigger. Okay, so now you notice the 4's actually the 4's gone slightly bigger. So depending upon where you are, it's just sort of brings your attention to it. The gear display is nice and easy to read. Okay, so. Now again, in my sort of first 5 minutes on the bike, my impression is just how slick the gear change is in comparison with my 2016 RT. So once you've got the RT going, you know, when you're out of sort of first gear or so, then it is actually I would say probably slightly less slick than this, but not far off. But your initial impression is that the gears on the GS8 just click into place. There's no sense of any clunkiness. Whereas on my RT, certainly, you know, if you're in neutral, sitting at a set of traffic lights, as I've just been, you know, coming into the BMW dealers there, and you go down into first, you know, it's like dropping a spanner, isn't it, into a box of metal. On this bike, you've got no sense of that. So I sense that whilst it is, I guess, essentially the same gearbox and the same engine, then actually there's been some re-engineering gone on that makes it feel a much sort of tighter unit, as it were. Another observation, and this I guess is just probably the fact that I fitted grip puppies onto mine, is that the grips on the GSA feel absolutely tiny. I literally feel like I'm gripping a couple of cocktail sticks. Almost to the point of I'm not quite sure whether I can control the bike in the same way. I don't know whether the grip puppies have made me sort of slightly lazy, or whether I don't think my hands are particularly large either. Yeah, they actually feel tiny. So my next observation then is the riding position. On the RT, you are leaning forward. Well, for me, my sort of elbows are actually above my wrists. You know, to a reasonable amount. On here, I would say, I don't know whether the handlebars are slightly higher or not, but I guess there's a different geometry between handlebars, the seat, and the footrest, so where your knees are. But what I would say here is that certainly my arms just feel slightly straighter. My arms feel slightly wider apart as well. So that's another observation. I guess after 20 minutes or so I probably won't notice, but at the moment it just feels slightly strange. I can remember the last time I was on a GS, and it was in my sort of coming back to bike week, and you know, I was very, very tentative indeed when I was riding that GS. It wasn't the GSA, it was just I think it was the GS TE version. And if you've watched that video, then my impression then was that the engine felt quite harsh. I think I likened it actually to a drill with a ratchet on at the time. Okay, now this engine, I have to say, actually does feel smoother on the GSA. So again, I'm putting that down to BMW's re-engineering. Quite a strong crosswind today, just affecting the balance. Being as now I'm on somebody else's bike, and being as how there's a £1,500 excess, you can understand why I'm taking things quite gingerly. Okay, another observation then is the screen itself. So this, I think this bike is actually the low, I don't know what the formal term is, but the low chassis version. So it's for the shorter motorcyclist. I'm 6 foot, just under 6'1" actually. Okay, the bike it does feel very comfortable. I know the screen's in its highest position for me, so again I'm not sure whether it's a fair test, but I'm certainly not getting as much wind protection as I would get from the RT screen. Certainly as I got on the ride on the way down today. I've attached my sat-nav 6, by the way. Okay, so I've got the benefit of the sat-nav 6 and the TFT display. I planned out the route as usual on Google My Maps, imported it into Basecamp, played around with it a little bit, just got rid of a couple of glitches on there, and uploaded it to the sat-nav, and that seems to be working very well. But yeah, this absolutely massive display here. You see there we've got a range of 213 miles. We're in dynamic mode as well, which is interesting because I've never yet ridden in dynamic mode. And what Josh, the salesman, told me is that the suspension on this bike is very smart. In effect, it's auto suspension. You know, you once you sort of got it set, you really you can adjust it if you want to, obviously manually, but you don't have to. The bike takes care of it. Works out your weight, it works out how fast you're going, it works out the road surface. So it literally takes care of everything for you. So yeah, this review isn't intended to be an expert review. I'll leave that to the people who ride GS's for a living. not an expert review of the GSA. I'm more interested today in the comparison, the feel, the sort of sensation. I asked Josh about does he get more people moving from RTs to GSs or GSs to RTs, and he said, well, actually it's about the same. So as far as I can just off from memory, and again this isn't an expert opinion, but from memory the difference is essentially between the RT and the GSA. Obviously there's the look in terms of the function. You've got a big sort of all the sort of what they call the Tupperware, the plastic wrapped around the RT, which no doubt at all in my opinion does give you superior weather protection. Okay, but I'll probably give you a view on that later on the ride as well. Okay, on the GSA you've got another gallon of fuel. Okay, so I guess if you want to, that's probably extending the range. I would say maybe a little bit over 300 miles, and I'd suggest a comfortable range on the RT in terms of fuel, which has a gallon less in the tank, 25 litres as compared with the GSA's 30 litres, probably about 250 miles, something like that. So, but again, would that be an issue for me? To be honest, I don't think I'd ever ride 250 miles without stopping anyway. Just another observation there with these sort of sharpish corners I'm going through at the moment is that the GSA's steering is actually less heavy than the RT. Okay, it's easier to sort of flick into these sort of tightish corners. Now, I guess the downside of that is that maybe some people have talked about sometimes on the GS how light the steering can be and twitchy when you're sort of going along slowly in traffic, whereas on the RT, a bit like driving my Volvo V70, actually the steering just sort of takes care of itself really. But I guess that's the you know, pays your money and he takes your choice there. So that for me is another difference. But it's certainly easy around these corners. And again, as I sort of get a little bit of confidence with that a little bit further on, then we'll play with that a little bit more. But yeah, certainly quite a strong crosswind today, 15 miles an hour, gusting up to 30. And of course it's the gusts and the severity of it hitting me now actually that can obviously affect your balance. And I think compared with, I would say, the lighter steering on this bike as well, would I be as stable on the RT? Would I be more stable? It's a question. In terms of the protection around your legs, I mean the front of the GSA is sort of so bulky and so bulbous and massive that it certainly protects the lower half of your body very well. I'd say your chest and arms are protected well, but I'd say maybe the helmet is, you know, unless you're sort of fitting one of these Vario screens that a lot of people go for, certainly on the RT the protection is superior, I would say. But the engine, you know, so far in 15 minutes into the ride, I would say generally, I've got to admit, it feels smoother than my 2016 RT. Now I'm assuming that what BMW will do either this year or probably over the next 12 months or so is they'll bring the 1200RT up to the same sort of engineering standard as the GS's, I guess. That would be the sensible thing to do, wouldn't it? Put a TFT display on it, put the less clunky gearbox in. I mean, for all I know, they might have done that already, so forgive me if I've misled you there. But as I say, I'm comparing with the 2016 RT at the moment. For those of you who may be thinking about maybe trading up to one of these, I would say, if I had to summarise so far, sort of 15-20 minutes in, this is a slightly easier bike to ride. I mean, just going around this corner here on the RT. Okay, I'm not saying the RT is going to struggle with a corner like that, it's not, but it just feels to me as a back to biker just easier to handle around those sort of corners. A little bit later on I'll pull over, share my limited knowledge of the bike with you. You're certainly not short of information. The combination of the TFT and the Sat-Nav 6. You're sort of a bit like the RT, you feel as though you're sitting in a fighter cockpit. I mean, for me, I like the TFT, but being rather old-fashioned and rather traditional, I actually prefer a dial. I prefer an analog dial, so I'm actually quite happy with my display on the RT. I do quite like it. So I certainly wouldn't prefer this display over the display I've got on the RT. And again, you'll probably be aware, you know, those of you who are into this kind of thing, that with the new electronic gizmos on the GS, is that it can talk to your mobile phone. It offers a fairly limited sat-nav capability as well. How useful that is, I actually don't know. Certainly won't be a patch on the sort of Garmin sat-nav 6. And is that amount of information a distraction? Might you be tempted to play with it too much? I've now owned my RT for, what, probably slightly more than 3 months, something like that. And I've got to say, probably 95% of the functionality I simply never use. I'm interested in how fast I'm going. I'm interested in the revs. I want to know some feedback on my fuel status, engine temperature. I want to know whether the indicators are indicating or not. The mileage is quite interesting. Every now and again I'll take a look at the average fuel. But I've got to say, most of the other stuff I never use. I've got mine set in rain mode and normal mode, and it doesn't change out of that. I'll probably go into might experiment with the dynamic mode when the roads dry out a little bit. But at the moment I felt that's the safest option. So most of the information, you know, probably 95-98% of the information that you can get on an RT with a sat-nav 5 or 6 is what you get here. Sorry, vice versa, yeah? So I get 95-98%, I reckon, of what you get here. So there's no sort of burning platform, there's no killer app as far as I'm concerned in terms of changing. And you've got to remember as well, this bike as well, you know, fully specified. You did this really blowing now, by the way, but this bike fully specified, as this one is that I'm actually riding today, you're not going to get much change at all out of £20,000. And again, it's not a fair comparison, but in terms of comparing my RT with this, you probably know, if you follow my story, I paid £11,500 for it, a 3,500 mile bike. Now it's interesting, this crosswind now is certainly affecting the speed that I feel safe to ride at on this bike, really pushing at me. And again, I'd have to ride my RT down this piece of road in these gusty conditions, but I've got to say, I've never experienced, I've ridden in windier conditions than this on the RT, and I've never experienced that sort of buffeting. So whether the RT is superior in crosswinds, I would suggest it probably is. But again, I'd be interested to know what you think. You can actually see the tops of some of these trees waving around. And again, with the RT, I'm not the sort of rider who's ever going to push it to the limit, what they call scratching around the roads. But my feel of the GS is maybe the GS, I would say, is more nimble. You know, so if you're going around twisty roads, I can see why riders of the GS's reckon, you know, they love it, because I guess you can sort of throw it around rather like a sports bike. Not that I know what a sports bike is like, but as I say, it's just the lightness and the nimbleness and the agility of the steering. So in some situations that's going to really benefit you. In other situations, maybe the RT, the slightly heavier steering, is going to benefit you. So I think you've got to work out what it is that's important to you, I think. I would imagine this bike must be easier to filter, it just feels narrower. So filtering up between two lanes of cars, you're going to feel more comfortable. I've never yet filtered, I must be honest, I've got a confession to make about that on my RT, and again that's partly down to my still learning the actual dynamics and feel of the bike, but I think it's also a function of the width of the bike as well. And again, a more experienced RT rider I'm sure does and can filter. So we're approaching the outskirts of Bedford now. So this is the first leg completed. So what, 20-30 minutes into the ride, and I've got to say this whole engine unit and gearbox combination just feels far more slick, I've got to say, and smoother than that on my RT. That said, of course, my RT is 2 years behind this technologically, so I'm probably not comparing like with like. In terms of the switch, I mean, I think they've used some different colours. They've used some different colours, but apart from that, really, no difference that I can see. And the fact that I can do it actually without looking down as well tells you that actually the two bikes, in that sense, you've got this sort of sense of interoperability. Yeah, it's funny actually, this it reminds me of the V-Strom 650 Suzuki. It sort of feels very light. Once you've got the thing moving, I mean, when it's stood still and you're moving it round off its stand, then it does feel like a big lump. But once the thing gets moving, it just feels like a V-Strom, really. That sort of sense of flickability and lightness. Yeah, here you see, changing down into first on the RT, I would have got an absolutely massive clunk. But on the GS, no, it's just you barely hear it, it's just a click. So we're just navigating around the north of Bedford at the moment. Bedford town. It's interesting, I can actually see now why people want to own both of these bikes. I know you hear stories of you know, people say that the you know, the GS can do everything the RT can do, and the RT can do everything the GS can do. But for me, there is certainly a different characteristic about them both, and I don't think it's just in the looks. I guess some people just are attracted to the looks of the GS. Something else the GS doesn't come with, and I don't even think you can specify this actually, is a heated seat. You do get the heated grips, which are on at the moment, but you don't get a heated seat. And I've got to say, I really appreciate my heated seat on the RT. I appreciate the big screen, I appreciate the weather protection. You just feel like you're in a bubble, and certainly on that first sort of 30-40 minutes, buffeting by the wind was an issue, and wind noise as well, I've got to say, is a greater issue. And again, you read, don't you, all the anecdotal evidence about the fact that the panniers on the GS are easier to pack for people who travel long distance, because you're putting stuff directly down into them, whereas on the RT the panniers open sideways. Again, whether that's a real issue, I'm not sure. Yeah, this is the B660, one of the classic biking roads. Runs all the way up to Kimbolton. You can carry straight on through, I think, into Cambridgeshire. Yeah, this engine marginally quieter than mine on the 2016 RT, I would say. And generally feels, the whole bike generally feels lighter, more agile. But I guess the downside of that is in the crosswind, it as we're going to get now, I think, by the feel of things. We shall see. Okay, so we've done a sort of I'd say a fairly major A road there between Northampton and Bedford. Some gentle curves. This is going to test us a little bit more. I think even on the with the lowered chassis on the GSA, the riding position, my perception, the riding position actually is slightly higher. So I think you are in a more dominant position, which I guess is useful for filtering. That higher position, I guess, as well, there's a trade-off there, isn't there, with the fact that you're going to get the wind blast as well, certainly from a crosswind, as I'm getting today. Need to be careful on the 660, these corners take you by surprise. Into advanced riding mode. Which hopefully I should have been in anyway. In terms of the power from the engine, just feels no different to the RT. I just feel it's delivered more smoothly. Again, filthy roads here in the UK at the moment. So rain coming down now, and I've got to say, on the RT, if I was out in the rain, I wouldn't be getting a fraction of the rain I'm getting on myself at the moment. So certainly you get better weather protection on the RT, no doubt about that. I think I read on one of the blogs is that the fact is, on the RT, you get wet, but you still get wet, but you get wet later. But what I'd suggest is the RT is probably going to keep you warmer as a year-round bike. On the base, you've got a heated seat, you've got better shielding from the elements. Maybe one of the factors with the GSA is that in a funny kind of way, whereas with the RT, maybe the RT cocoons you a little bit. Whereas with the GSA, maybe you're sort of out in the environment a little bit more, you're sort of more exposed to the elements, and maybe that's a factor for the people who enjoy that. I would guess, I don't know, but I'd guess 90% of GS owners don't take them off-road, maybe down a gravel track or something like that. So I'd imagine quite a bit of it is aesthetics, really. As you see, on the corners on the B660 come at you thick and fast. And again, a better rider, a more confident rider than myself would, I'm sure, would be going quite a bit faster than me, but as I say, somebody else's bike, £1,500 excess. 3.5 months into back to the bike, so again, caution rules. I'm not sure whether it's a function of the gearing or the smoothness of the engine, but the GSA feels as though it pulls a little bit more urgently, accelerates a little bit faster than the RT. In a straight line test, I've no idea how they would compare. It's just feels a little bit slicker. Yeah, here you see I'm riding along a ridge, 30 miles an hour, relatively slow, and I got to say the wind is sort of is blowing me all over the place. Now, with the heavier steering on the RT, I actually don't think that would happen. But as I say, you sacrifice the agility. So for me, most of my riding is in a rural situation. You know, it tends to be decent quality B roads. You know, so you're sort of 50-60 miles an hour. So in that sense, I think probably the RT is the preferable machine for me. Of course, you've got to take everything I say with a big dose of salt today, because there's something called confirmation bias, where in the back of your mind you know you've already made your mind up, you're committed to a course of action. So for me, I've already invested a lot of money, time and effort into the RT, so I'm hardly going to say that oh, I made a huge mistake and I should have bought one of these, if I'm being really honest. But I'll try and give you my honest answer at the end of the day. So you remember the question I posed right at the beginning of the ride is, if money was no object, if I was a millionaire, would I swap? Sat-nav wanted me to make a sharp left turn into there for 5 yards, then make a U-turn and carry on where I'm going. Welcome to Cambridgeshire. So I think very much like the RT, you feel very planted on a GSA. I guess that's a function of the weight of the bike. And the dynamic ESA, which is making 50,000 decisions a second in terms of setting the machine up for you. It's funny, in this really, I think, tall riding position, you literally feel like you're standing still doing 30 miles an hour. Ah, now then. Yeah, now what I was saying about the clicky gearbox, here we are neutral, into first gear. Now I was going to pull over there to actually take a look around the bike, but it was just a bit of a slope and I just wasn't comfortable putting the bike on its side stand there. But yeah, interesting, just putting the bike from neutral into first there, we got the clunk again. So it does seem that when you are not moving, Actually, that is exactly the same as I would get in the RT, no better, no worse. These are two very sharp right-hand corners, a left-hander and a right-hander. So again, you want to keep away from oncoming lorries here. But I would say the GS is easier around those sort of corners, if you do a lot of right-hand corners. It's an unfair comparison really, isn't it, when you take a bike out for an hour and a half. All you can do is give impressions, and I'd be curious actually in the comments section, you know, those of you who've actually owned both of these, or owned either bike for a considerable period of time, what your impressions are. So the wind is coming from my front and left now. You're not so bad when it's constant, it's when it gusts that gives you a problem. And again, just an impression, but I feel actually the RT would cope with that better. And I would say the comfort of the ride is identical to the RT. You know, going over some bumpy road repairs at the moment where they've sort of stitched a new bit of tarmac into the road and a couple of potholes, wouldn't feel any different at all on the RT. So I think I'm starting to come to the opinion the GSA, I don't think no better, no worse than an RT. I don't even think that's the right question to ask really. Is it any better, is it any worse? It's just, it's a different machine. Obviously it shares the same dynamic ESA, you know, it shares largely the same controls, it's got the same engine more or less. I think you've got to recognise the fact that the bike I'm riding is 2 years older, so it's 2016 model, so I've no doubt the 2018 RT will have a smoother engine, probably identical to this one. I guess if you know, someone who's touring all over Europe, like my cyber mates in Ridercam TV, then yeah, you want the bigger tank. You don't want to be refueling all the time, and if it's going to give you an extra 50 or 60 miles, then you'll take that. If you, you know, think that it makes it marginally easier to carry luggage in those panniers that open at the top, then yeah, you might want that. If you're going to be going off-road, then you might want that. But I personally don't need any of those things, you know. So for me, my RT was a machine to take me out into the great British landscape on some decent day rides and the occasional overnight stop and go and explore really. So you know, weather protection, comfort, you know, I like the heated seat on the RT. Now I can really feel that wind pulling on the left hand side, almost dangerous. Now again, whether that's function of the bike, I don't know. I'd have to ride the RT along there, so it's, again, it's an unfair comparison, so I won't make that comparison. But certainly on my body, I can feel more wind, and I guess on a, you know, in a colder climate, the RT is going to protect you better. I don't think I'd have any hesitation about saying that. Sat nav's doing a good job. Looks like my route design is working. The one obvious thing I didn't point out is the handlebars are clearly wider on the GS. Gives you more traction. Now back into Northamptonshire now. But yeah, so wider than the RT. Going to pull over in the lay-by up here. We'll have a look around the bike. It's the same lay-by that I think on my second observed ride, oh no, third observed ride with Dave. Dave gave me the feedback. Might have seen that film. Learning to be an advanced rider. And it's also the lay-by where Tim, the Honda back-to-biking instructor on my first back-to-biking ride, pulled me over as well, gave me some feedback. So it's quite an important lay-by for me. So I got some feedback on my last IM ride about when you park the bike in a lay-by, don't park it lengthwise, you put it in sideways, and then that way when you pull out you're not looking desperately over your shoulder. So I'm trying desperately not to ride two ways, i.e. one way when I'm out with the observers and another way when I'm just doing other stuff. But yeah, so here's the GSA, so it's in triple black. Okay, so this bike I think has I think this has only 80 miles on it. So okay, so I will probably double that level of mileage today. You can see down here at the front we've got the LED lights, okay, which I'm at some stage considering fitting on the RT. I probably won't go for the BMW ones because they're too expensive, but I'll probably fit the Hex Easy Can at some stage and then probably bolt a few electronic goodies onto that. You've got the LED indicators. Okay, you've got the engine bars on. I think I've got Wunderlich engine bars on mine, which I'm quite pleased about. Quite like those. And the chassis of the bike, you know, the actual internals, the skeleton, if you will. I imagine if you strip the bits of plastic off the RT, then this is exactly what you would see underneath it all, actually. So it's going to look very similar. So you can see here the dynamic ESA gubbins in there, and again it's going to be similar externally to the RT. Obviously this is a later model, so in terms of the programming and the modes and so forth, I guess that's probably slightly updated. Okay, you get these larger panniers. Okay, so, and again these panniers, when you actually get quite up to close, and this one has a bit of a cutout on it because it's up against the exhaust, but you know, whacking great panniers. But to be honest, I can't think you're going to be able to get an awful lot more in there than you can get in an RT. You know, it's I guess it's you pays your money, you take choice. And for me, I've got to say, just aesthetically, you know, they seem very angular, very boxy. Whereas I must be honest, I really like the shape of the panniers and the top box. Not that I've got the top box on the RT, not the BMW box anyway. But I actually prefer that. So that's the externals of the bike. Yeah, so at the moment you can see here this says nav. Okay, so and we get that by pressing this this menu button just here. Okay, and if you want to control the TFT display, you just press and hold in the menu button at the bottom, and you'll see it moves over onto TFT. Yeah, but as I say, it's a cracking good display. If you like electronic displays, I must be honest, I'm again, probably because I'm old-fashioned, but I actually prefer the analog display. I'd rather see a dial. And actually, to me, I actually prefer that look. But there's just so much information on there. Okay, so it's on the TFT display, and then you can obviously cycle through, you know, the various modes. I'm not going to do that today because I'm not an expert on it, and I don't want to mislead anybody. Where you see this little sort of symbol here, it basically shows there is more information available below that, so you can actually press the menu button again, and you can get onto different screens, and then you can get into all the different sub screens and so forth. Okay, so we've got tyre press on there, we've got all kinds of stuff, haven't we? Plus 4 degrees, and it certainly feels cold today. And if you just press the menu button back up again, then you actually come back to the original screen. And then if I press the menu button at the top, okay, you'll notice that little, just hold it on the top there, you'll notice now it's switched over to nav. Okay, so now the wonder wheel, if I flick the wonder wheel to one side, then you come up with all these displays. Now on the RT you can't do this, so this is something you can do on a GS but you can't do on an RT. Okay, you don't get that level of functionality, and you get all these displays that you can sort of dial into. They are front tyre 35.4 psi. That's good to know, isn't it? Nice useful bit of information today. Okay, so so there we go. Let's sort of come back out of there, let's get back into the main screen, let's get back onto my route. So again, from neutral down into first, it really does clunk actually. But I'd suggest when you're riding, it is a little bit slicker. Well, considerably slicker. than the 2016 RT. But I think my RT, in terms of spec, has, I've got to say, virtually everything this bike has got, plus a few more things. As I mentioned before, you know, we've got the, I've got an electrically adjustable screen, I've got a heated seat, you know, which I really appreciate. That wind is really roaring now, and again in my RT, on my RT, the sense I have is that I would be much better shielded from it. So again, maybe one of the things you have to factor in is whether you're going to be doing much winter riding, you know, in sort of cold, wet conditions. So I'm an all year round rider. I don't park my bike up in the garage and that's it. You know, I like to keep going. But I guess if you were a predominantly fair weather rider, then the being exposed to the elements on the GS might be certainly a more pleasurable experience. Yes, here I'm now on a dual carriageway, 70 miles an hour, and there's no doubt at all that if I was on the RT I would be shielded better than this. Yeah, what I'd say, so I'm basically heading now, you can see 70 miles an hour there or so, into quite a strong gusting westerly wind, cold wet wind, and round my helmet basically being hammered really. My lower half of my body feels absolutely shielded, you know, feels very well protected, so I imagine the shape at the front of the bike is, you know, the fairing and so forth actually deflect the blast around that. On my arms I can feel more airflow than I would do on the RT. So would I swap? No. If money was not an object, no I wouldn't. No, I think I'd stick with my RT. I'm happy with the choice I've made. Would I refuse one of these if you gave it to me? Absolutely not. It's a lovely machine. So I think that answers my question really. So I'm hoping what this film will do is to just get people talking really about the pros and cons. I mean, they are ultimately, in some ways they're the same bike, in some ways they're different bikes. And it all comes down to what do you want to use it for? What time of year do you want to use it? How much weather protection do you need? Are you going to take it off road? How much luggage do you need to carry? And then, you know, the sort of final questions really then about the aesthetics really. I actually do like the look of the RT above the GS. I don't particularly like, as a personal thing, the sort of scaffolding, you know, the exoskeleton, if you will, that you can see, you know, in plain view. But again, you know, you pays your money and you takes your choice. So that's just a matter of personal preference, isn't it?